All right, looks like, excuse me. Looks like we are just past 7 o'clock and we have a good number of participants here. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to share an agenda for our meeting tonight with everybody. So I'll just go ahead and share my screen here. And then actually, before I do that, so we're going to have a staff presentation. We sort of discuss background of the project and things and where we're at. And then we're going to open it up for discussion at the end. So we'll try and keep it brief because it looks like there's about 30 people on here. So we want to make sure that we make time for everybody to share their thoughts and give us feedback if they would like to. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. Hopefully everybody can see that. Kat, can you see that? Okay. All right. Sounds good. So here's our agenda. It's relatively basic. First of all, welcome. Welcome to you all. As I said, there's about 30 people here, so I think that's a great turnout. So my name is Kevin Garcia. I'm the principal planner and zoning administrator for Urbana. With me tonight are two other planners, Kat Trotter and Nick Olson, and they will be speaking a little bit during this presentation. We're going to tag team it a little bit. Excuse me. I'm getting over a week-long cold, so I might be coughing a little bit. Also have some kids in the background, so apologies there. Okay, so at all of these meetings, we're just setting a couple of basic ground rules. So we ask that everybody be civil, be open-minded, and if you have comments, try and make them productive comments so that we can, take direction and make this project, better at the end of the day. So, and then we'll discuss the project background, goals, and timeline. And we'll go over some feedback that we've received. So we've gotten a lot of written feedback, and also we put out a survey about a week and a half ago. We'll be going over some of those results with you all. Then we'll get down into sort of the nuts and bolts. So the options for reusing Greek houses in this district. And then give you a brief update on parking. So I know at our last meeting, that was before we had talked to our parking folks about that. And then we'll open it up for discussion. So just a little bit on the project background. Really, this project's been a couple years in the making. Back in 2019, Landmarks Illinois, which is a historic preservation advocacy group, listed Greek houses, so fraternity and sorority houses in Champaign and Urbana on their list of 10 most endangered buildings in the state of Illinois. We, as the planning staff, were already thinking at the time that we might want to make some changes to the district that all of those Greek houses are in, because we noticed that there were some that were going vacant for extended periods of time. They weren't really being able to be reused under our current zoning regulations. So we were thinking about making changes, and I think that that Landmarks Illinois report sort of gave us a nudge. Of course, then there was the pandemic, which kind of slowed things down for a lot of our to-do projects. But we've gotten through that mostly, and now we're coming out the other side. And we've been having neighborhood meetings and things, which I think Kat will get to on the timeline here in a second. But I just want to state that the main goal of this text amendment is to make changes to our zoning ordinance, really to help preserve and reuse old fraternity and sorority houses. And of course, we would want to do that in a way that doesn't affect the neighborhood in a negative way. So I will let Kat handle this next one. Take it away, Kat.
Yeah, just to recap our timeline, back in 2019, staff surveyed the R7 property owners to get an idea of how these properties were being rented, if they were being rented to full capacity or occupied to full capacity, and if the property owners had any plans for building renovation in the future. And following that survey, we started formulating ideas for the R7 project. We took preliminary ideas to Plan Commission as a study session back in July of 2021. And after that meeting, we had a few neighborhood meetings before going to HPC with a second study session this February. Since then, we've had another neighborhood meeting, and as Kevin mentioned, we sent out a survey about a week and a half ago to get some ideas from residents in the neighborhood. We sent out postcards to residents within 300 feet of R7 properties, and we'll talk more about that tonight. The text amendment, or tonight we're having our fourth neighborhood meeting, and then the text amendment will go to Plan Commission on April 7th, which is coming up quickly next Thursday, and that meeting will be in person. Just want to make a note of that. We're going back to board and commission meetings in person, which is great. And then following that Plan Commission meeting, we will go to the Committee of the Whole and City Council for more discussion. That's about it as far as the timeline goes. And Kevin just brought up a location map of the R7 properties. I think we've showed this at several of our neighborhood meetings, but just to refresh you and give everyone an idea of where these properties are, Lincoln Avenue runs roughly down the middle of this map. And as you can see, there are R7 properties on the east and west sides. Kevin, you can go to the next map. This is the building types map that has also been featured at our neighborhood meetings in the past. The R7 district is characterized by Greek houses and rooming houses primarily. There are also a few religious institutions and apartment conversions. 7 of the Greek houses are located on the west side of Lincoln Avenue in the campus area. 30 of the R7 properties are located between Lincoln Avenue and Busey Avenue, and 5 of the properties are located east of Busey Avenue. And just to point out, the black rectangle on this map is the Lincoln-Busey corridor. Over half of the R7 properties are in the Lincoln-Busey corridor and are subject to the Lincoln-Busey corridor design guidelines. Here are some site photos of the properties in the district. There are Greek houses, like I said, on the east and west sides of Lincoln Avenue and along Lincoln Avenue. This one on Lincoln Avenue, and the next one is on the east side, located further into the neighborhood. As I stated, there are also religious institutions. This one permitted with a special use permit, and then rooming houses are our last building type.
All right, so as I said, we've received quite a bit of feedback from neighborhood meetings, and then in writing, so via emails mostly after those neighborhood meetings. We also received a letter from the Voices of West Urbana working group, and I'll summarize that in a second. And then there's the neighborhood survey that we mentioned a couple times that we'll get to after I summarize. Sorry, that the letter from the Voices of West Urbana. So that letter had 4 main points in it, and I think we can get into these a little bit later as we have discussion. But those 4 main points were the group wanted to maintain Lincoln Avenue as a dividing line between University and the neighborhood, to treat Greek houses and rooming houses differently, to only allow residential uses by right. And then they asked staff to not start with the MOR, which is another district we have, table of uses when looking at this. And we threw out that idea. So that one's not in play anymore. I also wanted to point out, I apologize. I think there was some confusion between meetings because we had inadvertently left up some draft documents from either the last or maybe even a previous neighborhood meeting. And I think folks were maybe looking at those documents and thinking that that's what we were currently proposing, but we had moved on from those already. So apologies if you were looking at sort of an old table of uses and some of our old initial draft language we were proposing, and if that caused any confusion. So now on to the survey. So this is the postcard that we sent out, as Kat mentioned. It also invited folks to this meeting. We sent out over 600 surveys, over 600 postcards. And as Kat said, that was to people living within 300 feet of the district. As of earlier today, I think we had about 180 responses. And I think the survey results that we'll be reporting on tonight come from yesterday. So it was about 150 some responses. And we pulled out all the responses from people who said that they lived in the neighborhood. So we wanted to sort of tailor these results to just folks from the neighborhood. So I'll let Kat and Nick describe these.
Thanks, Kevin. As Kevin said, we've pulled out the neighborhood responses specifically for tonight's meeting. We use general use categories for these survey questions, including residential uses, food sales and service uses, retail uses, professional office uses, and then personal service uses like barber shops and massage therapy offices. We also asked about what types of restrictions people would like to see on the proposed uses. The complete survey results will be made available with the Plan Commission packet, but like I said, for tonight's meeting, we have tailored it to the neighborhood specifically. This first slide pertains to residential uses in existing Greek houses, and the neighborhood was largely in favor of residential uses in existing buildings. This included apartment uses. Next slide, Kevin. For food sales and service, over 50% of respondents were in favor of food sales and service uses, including bakeries and cafes in existing buildings without any restrictions. Another quarter of the respondents were in favor of these uses with some sort of restriction, and those varied from limited size to limited operating hours, and boarding commission.
Yeah, I think we might have lost you for a second, but I was chasing down an errant toddler, so I'm not sure where you ended. I just went on to the retail uses. Let me know if you want me to go back or anything.
No, that's perfect. This one, as you can see, we got some varied results. Some respondents were in favor of retail uses. And then next slide, Kevin, pertains to professional offices. The majority of respondents were in favor of professional office uses in some capacity, although many respondents said that they would like to see restrictions on either size, operating hours, or requiring board and commission approval, or some combination of the three. And then lastly, we looked at personal service uses, and these were mixed results as well, with about 40% of respondents saying that they would be in favor and 18% saying with some restrictions.
So at the end of the survey, we also included an open-ended response question, just asking survey participants if they had any other thoughts about the projects they'd like to share. And of the people in the neighborhood who responded to the survey that we'd already filtered it down to, about half of those did this open-ended response. So we're talking about responses from 40 people for what we pulled together for this meeting. And there's obviously more nuance and variation than what I've got on screen right here, right now. And we can make fuller results available after the survey has been closed. But just so we don't take up the whole meeting, I pulled out some of the main recurring themes. So I'll just go over those really quickly. So as you could see from the multiple choice question, it seems that there's general agreement that residential uses in the buildings are okay. But in these open-ended response questions, you can kind of see some variation in priorities about different potential residential uses. Some people mention affordable housing as an interesting possibility. Some people would like to keep them as student-oriented properties. Other people mention higher-end condos or luxury apartments. Senior living facilities also got a couple mentions, so definitely some variety there. There also seems to be general agreement among survey participants that they're happy that there are efforts to preserve these buildings, and that if possible, they would like to see the buildings preserved. A lot of comments expressing concerns about potential traffic and parking issues being generated by commercial uses on the properties. An interesting bit of variation there is that sometimes parking comments can be in terms of wanting to make sure that commercial uses have enough parking. But then on the other hand, we've also gotten comments concerned that potentially green space might be taken away to make room for parking, and parking getting in the way of other neighborhood uses or aesthetics. We got some interesting feedback looking at potential commercial uses as an economic opportunity for the neighborhood, both from the perspective of creating jobs and also generating revenue for the city in the form of taxes. Several comments excited about the possibility of commercial uses from a walkability, accessibility, and convenience perspective in terms of just having businesses closer to where you live. And then we also got several comments interested in uses that could help facilitate community space and interaction. Art galleries and event spaces were things that got mentioned along those lines, along as spaces for social service provision got some mentions. So those were the main themes so far.
All right, so I'm going to jump into, so based on all the feedback we've received, we've developed what I'll call our general approach, which we plan to present to the Plan Commission. And we, of course, we can discuss this during the discussion part, but I'll try and be as brief in my description, but as thorough as I need to be. So what we're proposing is throughout the entire R7 district, it seems like residential uses, there's near consensus that those should be allowed by right. So throughout the district, residential uses by right. Then with respect to commercial uses, taking Lincoln Avenue, using that as the dividing line. But I think we recognize that Lincoln Avenue itself is a bit of a different animal than when you get sort of off that block face and start getting east into the neighborhood. So we think along Lincoln Avenue, and to the west of Lincoln Avenue, it would make sense to allow some commercial uses by right, with restrictions on their size and operating hours. So these would be sort of smaller commercial uses in mostly much larger buildings. And then if somebody, say, wanted to take an entire old Greek house and turn it into a commercial enterprise, then they would need to go through the special use permitting process, go through Plan Commission, get neighborhood feedback, go through City Council before anything like that is approved. From what we've heard, as you go east into the neighborhood, we would propose no commercial uses by right, but we don't see harm in leaving open the opportunity for somebody who has a good project to petition Plan Commission and City Council, again, with a special use permit for any sort of commercial use in those areas. So even if you wanted to have just a tiny 200 square foot something, I don't know, retail bit in an otherwise residential building, you would still need to go through the Plan Commission and City Council to get approval for that. So that's our general approach. And like I said, we're happy to discuss that. So I think we're ready to open it up for discussion. And we are, and this will also come out in the Plan Commission packet. So you'll note in the survey we were using sort of broad use categories. There are some things in some of those categories that we don't think would fit, in some of these buildings. So we're striking some of those out. We're bringing a draft to Plan Commission. We didn't want to get super in the weeds tonight by going through each and every possible use in the table of uses, because there are a lot. But we think we've received enough sort of feedback on the broad use categories that we can pare those down, bring them to Plan Commission. And please, we welcome folks to come to Plan Commission and help us with the discussion there as well. So really what we're looking for is feedback on the general approach that I just described. I can go back to that map if people need, or we can just, I can stop sharing my screen and we can look at each other face to face over the internet. And then there were a couple of things that came up in the comments in the survey that we hadn't really anticipated, or we kind of thought like maybe about a hotel or something, like a boutique hotel. Somebody might want to do something like that, but it isn't under one of those sort of broader 5 categories we were looking at. So we kind of wanted to get some feedback on some of those types of uses. Mostly the specific ones are hotels, any sort of like alcohol sales, which just from our perspective, you probably wouldn't want to see, just your regular old liquor store. But if somebody wanted to own or open up like a wine shop or something that, seemed like it fit there better, should we entertain that? And then Kat and I were just chatting and we said, hey, well, microbreweries a use. So we just want to know if folks, I mean, you could make a really cool microbrewery in one of these old buildings. We're just throwing that out there. We're open for discussion, but I'm going to stop the share and then let's just open it up and talk about those things. So general approach, and then maybe some of those uses or other topics that we haven't really mentioned. Okay, so I will, let's look and see who's on the participants list. So we're up to 45 participants now, so that's nice. If you do want to speak, please use the raise hand function, and then we can promote you to be able to speak. All right, Annie Adams, I see you first. I think we can, I don't know if I can promote you. Somebody can. There we go.
Hello. Can you hear me? Is it working?
Yes. Yes, we can.
I have no idea. This is all new to me. Sure. Zoom is new to me. Let's pretend. So what I was going to say is I just recently came back from a trip in New Orleans, and they are taking a bunch of these giant houses and they are turning them into micro hotels on the 2nd floor. And the 1st floor are like high-end restaurants and bars. I do know that we have an affordable housing crisis happening with our students, so I'm deeply concerned about that. And I also would just like to speak to businesses on the 1st floor as a person who, when I was at the University of Minnesota, I lived actually in Bob Dylan's old apartment above Gray's Campus Drug. And you don't have a lot of parties when you have a business on the 1st floor. And it was the same thing when I was at the Rhode Island School of Design. There was Louis Diner was on the 1st floor. And again, you just don't have parties and those businesses do take out the trash, and those businesses, you have people on premise frequently. So I know people have concerns about adding businesses and adding parking, and we desperately do not need to add more parking. None of those businesses actually had parking. And I do know that the Chateau Hotel, the Chateau Apartments, tends to have a pretty empty parking lot, but their bike racks are just overflowing. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you. See, Sarah McAvoy has her hand raised.
Yeah, good evening. Hi, thanks. Thanks for the meeting. So if I understood you correctly, 600 postcards went out, 180 responses, but 40 people within what, the 300 feet range or in the immediate vicinity, right? So is that correct?
80 people responded to the overall survey within the neighborhood, and then it was just that open-ended response that we only got 40 responses. So 80 people from the neighborhood.
80, not 180. Okay, because what we do know is that over or around 200 people signed the vow letter from the neighborhood group, and so I just want to be careful that we don't just elevate the 80 responses when we know we have an overwhelming response with the 200 people who are asking for very specific things to preserve the neighborhood. So I want to make sure that when this gets reported, that the 200 versus the 80 or versus the 40, right? Because, for instance, the retail response, 44% said yes to retail use. And, you know, when presidents get a 44% approval rating, then we know that in the midterms, the other party's going to take control. Okay. So that's not looking good, right? So we want that message to be heard that 36% said no to that, right? So they're going to, I'm sure the VOW people will be here tonight and able to speak more articulately than I can on this issue. But as I sit as a homeowner, very, very close, Hussein and I, very, very close to all these proposals, I don't think anything should be by right. Anything should be by right. I am voicing my opposition to by right. And I really appreciated the WUNA discussion in which people said that the city council would be basically giving power to unelected officials to make the decisions. And I get that you have had a lot of meetings, you've sent out the survey, you are eliciting responses, but when you get them, how deeply is the listening happening? Will the decision making be rooted in the 200 signatures from the VOW group? And then how would that impact? Like that, really what we want is our voices to shape this as we care so deeply. So I'll stop there and look forward to listening to what others have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I think I want to be clear. So I think there have been a couple of things that VOW has produced. So the first is the petition that they sent to City Council, which had those 200 signatures. The letter I was referring to earlier was a specific letter from the VOW working group. And I actually don't know how many members that working group has, or whether, you know, I don't know if 200 people signed off on that letter. So that's, you know, that's something I need to ask those leaders of that group. But thank you for your feedback. Nancy has her hand raised. I think you're here, Nancy, but you're muted right now. Okay, Nancy, we might have to come back to you in a sec, just to keep things moving. Let's let Max Beadle speak.
Hello. Can you
Hi,
hear me?
Max. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Awesome. first off, I want to say thanks for taking the time to go over all these things with everyone. It's certainly something that I think we all appreciate, even if we, might disagree on, the people in the Zoom might disagree on certain things, but I think we can all say that we appreciate taking the time to talk with us. I will, try to keep it short, but I am, more broadly in favor of more inclusive zoning. I think you see with a lot of these fraternities that you guys mentioned, fraternities or sororities, I think it's certainly valid to want to preserve the building itself. But when a lot of them go completely vacant inside, I do, really, really strongly support allowing zoning changes to allow for more apartments in there, or even for retail use, such as a coffee shop or a bakery, that sort of thing. I think the first speaker kind of talked about affordability within kind of those zoning regions and just within campus as a whole. At campus and Champaign and Urbana as a whole, the affordability is kind of an issue that people see throughout the country, and increasing a supply of rentable apartments by changing these zoning rules, I think would be something that really does help with affordability and would certainly allow for more economically diverse neighborhoods. So that's something that I really do strongly support. And from my personal perspective as a renter, I really do like Urbana, but that's something that I have issues with, is that sometimes finding an affordable apartment here is a bit more difficult than some of the surrounding areas. I also think housing trends as a whole are relevant to talk about. I'm younger personally, so a lot of people around my age in their 20s or so aren't buying homes and aren't using single family housing as often as maybe some of the past generations. So that's something that's relevant. And as you guys mentioned, during your PowerPoint, increasing or changing these uses from just say, if you find 9 people, you can rent out this house, changing it to maybe single person apartments or 2-person apartments increases revenue for the city. It can be an economic driver, helping our small businesses within, the local economy. And it's also more efficient, more sustainable, more more affordable uses of space than strictly single family uses. So that's I guess what my comment was. I would say I broadly do support, and I think it's relevant to try to take everyone. I'm a renter, and I think it's relevant to try to take everyone's perspectives on this issue. But I'm strongly in support of more inclusionary zoning, whether it be residential or commercial.
Thank you, Max. All right, I'm not seeing anybody else with their hand raised. Oh, there we go. Hussein?
Mute, okay.
There you go. We can hear you.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks very much for the opportunity. I like to comment on the forum that we have for this meeting. You are visible to us, but we can't see the speakers. It's kind of a little bit like speaking in the dark. I feel like this is not how the Zoom meetings are normally held. I don't know what was the reason for this forum, because I want to be able to see the other people who's in the audience and who's saying what more clearly. Can you respond to that first? Then I have another follow-up question. Thank you.
Yeah, so the previous meetings we were running through a different software, which is the one that the city uses for our phone system. And it's called Ring Central. And when it works for people, I think it works pretty well. But we had comments from people that they weren't able to get onto Ring Central. That's an issue that I've actually run into when I've tried to get onto meetings before. So We switched this over to Zoom, and apparently the way that it's set up is more like, I think more like a council or commission meeting where we have sort of the presenters on one side and the attendees on the other. So I can understand your frustration with it not being as sort of as open as the previous meetings. We did have a reason for switching over, and I apologize that the Zoom format is not the same type of format that we used before.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I want to point out that people purchased homes in this neighborhood. I'm talking about the Busey-Lincoln corridor. When I say people, I mean families with young children. There are such people living next to my house. I live on 805 West Michigan Avenue. And there are two young families with children on both sides of my house. And I have two concerns. One is, the traffic situation in Lincoln Avenue has considerably amplified over the years. And these, there are cars, that affects the side streets, the state streets also, because people make turns and people are speeding and turn into these neighborhoods with young kids playing, sometimes on the sidewalks, sometimes they cross the street. So I do have concerns about the change of the tone and change the nature of the neighborhood from a residential neighborhood to one of a commercial one, which is one of the provisions in your plan, or even high density. I don't know the density of these apartments you're envisioning. I don't. The streets and the situation right now with the traffic, etc., is kind of going to create issues for the current residents, I think. My second point is people are concerned about the value of their property, the people who own the residences in this neighborhood. You know better than I do that the taxes in these Lincoln Busey corridor, as well as in the state streets, is quite high, and we're wondering how if the value of the homes go down, because this may not be as desirable a residential area because of developments such as the PUDs, other developments. It may not be as attractive to families to move into this neighborhood. It will change the nature again, the character of the neighborhood. And the Lincoln Busey corridor document is specifically addressing the character of the neighborhood. So what you're proposing, frankly, did not make much reference. Well, I stand corrected. You outlined in a map the Busey-Lincoln corridor, but nevertheless, you need to emphasize, in my view, or one needs to emphasize why that document was generated in 2005, and why people following that, reading that, felt comfortable in moving to this neighborhood. The families moved to this neighborhood. I think we value also people renting, some of these older homes. There's no question about that. But some of these proposals, I think, may open up the gates for many things that they may have unintended consequences. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. I do want to, before we go on to other folks, I think there's a couple things that were brought up there that I want to talk about. So the general approach that we're taking, so we're not trying to propose something that's going to turn the neighborhood into a commercial area. So anything that's not along Lincoln Avenue, we're proposing. If somebody wanted to do commercial there, you would need to get a special use permit. So there would be ample opportunity for neighborhood residents to weigh in on any proposals that were off of Lincoln Avenue. And then along Lincoln Avenue, it's only about 10 properties that could be used for some small scale by right commercial developments. And when zoning changes happen, things don't typically change very fast. So it's pretty unlikely that you'd see all 10 of those properties have any commercial element, perhaps ever, but certainly not all within a matter of a few years. So I think the amount of commercial opportunity that would be available with the changes that we're proposing is pretty small, and that's by design, because we know this isn't a commercial neighborhood, and we're not trying to turn it into as such. Also, thank you for bringing up the Lincoln-Busey corridor, because we sort of touched on that, but we didn't actually get into detail with that. So the Lincoln-Busey corridor, for those of you who are unaware or need a refresher, it is a corridor that's between Lincoln and Busey. It's bound by, I believe, Oregon on the north and Pennsylvania on the south. And it's a design district, and it governs things like new construction or changes to exteriors of buildings. What we're proposing with this text amendment is, and I guess we didn't state this really clearly at the beginning, because I think we've said it so many times, sometimes we forget about these things, but we're only proposing these changes to the new uses to be allowed in existing buildings, because again, the goal of this text amendment would be to preserve the existing historic buildings in the neighborhood. So as far as how the Lincoln-Busey corridor design guidelines would factor in, if somebody's reusing an existing building and they're not making any exterior changes to it, those guidelines would not, really wouldn't factor in. And if somebody were trying to make exterior changes, they might not even be able to fit into what we're proposing with this text amendment. Anyway, so I wanted to be clear, because I don't think we've actually sort of articulated how these changes would fit into the Lincoln-Busey corridor. So thank you for bringing that up and letting us sort of state that. Hussein, did you want to respond? I know there's some other folks that wanted to jump in, but I see your hand is back up.
I think I let other people also speak. I appreciate your responding to my concerns. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, Eric Sachs.
Thanks, Kevin and Kat, and I appreciate the effort you've put into trying to respond to some of the earlier comments. I think first thing I want to say is, in the petition from VOW, which included a large number of the community, we did have a bullet point there about the dividing line between Lincoln, east and west, and we also had about maintaining the low density housing in the West Urbana neighborhood. So those things are very well, large consensus in the neighborhood about those points. So I think some of the ideas of, the businesses that could take place on Lincoln Avenue are potentially good ideas, but the details are very important. And if we do this by right, the community and the council will not have any input into the details once it's done. And I think what you will hear from a large number of the community and presented to council is that we want input. So I think it would be better if you had it as special use, the option for all of those properties in the West Urbana neighborhood. I think east of Lincoln, it's already a mixed use, so it wouldn't really change the character of the neighborhood at all. We have a very good mix of homeowners, family, renters, and they all have different needs and interests. And it should be discussed in some detail when we're considering a type of business. I think you propose putting a bunch of bars on Lincoln, it's gonna not fly, this sort of thing. Or a gambling shop, for example, that's also gonna have a lot of bad, someone talks about a cafe, man, maybe get some detractors, maybe get some people saying yes, I don't know, but I think we should consider it. And the other thing that we should really think about in this conversation is that, we have a bit of a difficult history with developers trying to do things that the community doesn't really want and not listening to the community when we speak up. And so I feel if we try to do this by right, there will be a lot of hard feelings, potential, feelings that maybe we're not being heard again. And it'd be better for it to just go through a process on a single case basis. I think the people who own these properties will find that if a good use is proposed for one of those buildings on Lincoln, especially those Greek houses, I think they'll find a fair bit of community support if they have a really good project and they talk to the community. I think it should be an interactive process. Well, that's my 2 cents. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Eric. And thank you for reminding me what about those 2 points that were in the initial petition. So I think since we were using the argument that it's only there's only 10 or so properties along Lincoln Avenue that would that would be subject to the things we're proposing. I think that kind of cuts both ways. So you would have an argument that, hey, it's only 10 properties, so why not require special use by right? So that's something for us to think about. Eric, you got your hand back up, so please.
Yeah, just a quick sort of response to that. I mean, the other argument is that there's currently no businesses on that side of Lincoln, and there's a reason for that. And in West Urbana neighborhood. And I'll remind you of the Lincoln and Nevada apartment building. When that went up, the developer proposed putting in a sort of an outdoor seating area in the front. There was a lot of community pushback about that. They did not want parties out there, and the neighbors did not feel comfortable about having a large groups of people hanging out along Lincoln. So it's a sensitive issue.
Yeah, I understand. All right, let's we got a few more folks with their hands up. So Leslie Sherman.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, because you couldn't for a moment. First off, I want to give input that the format that you set for this meeting was how you chose to use Zoom. As an IT professional, I can tell you that Zoom could be done the same way you did the other meeting. I do appreciate you switching to Zoom because the other one was I found very inaccessible. And from a disability perspective, as well as a usability perspective, as a mobile user trying to call into these meetings in the evening. So thank you for switching, but it is a question of how you configured it. So you just need to do a better job of that next time, please, or look into that. I'm just FYI on that. Also, I am a little concerned that the petition by Val, which did have such a strong, as was pointed out, those 2 pieces, especially that are still relevant to what's being discussed and proposed, I think that that should have just as much weight, if not more, than your survey, especially considering the response rate from the neighborhood. I do have concerns that you curated the data that you shared with us relative to the survey to only show neighborhood data. So, and I'm also curious as to what you will be providing the Planning Commission in when you provide this data. Will you provide the same set of data and graphs that you've shown us, or are you going to show the whole survey? So that would be helpful to know going forward. Another thing around that, I do want to say thank you very much for taking our feedback and to setting up these meetings, and for also adjusting what your original plans had been. And you mentioned that in the previous meeting there were misunderstandings around documentation. I don't know if that necessarily was the case, especially since an MOR district was discussed at that time in the last meeting. I've been attending almost every single one of these meetings. That said, thank you for having the meetings. Thank you for adjusting it. I do have concerns, though, still. I want to go along with my fellow neighbors that have spoken so far. Well, I want to point out two things. One is that I think it's very under publicized that our neighborhood is actually one of your more diverse mixed-use neighborhoods outside of the downtown area, and maybe closer to campus, that we have so many mixed use. We have lots of apartment buildings. We have lots of rentals. We have a lot of single family homes, as well as condos even. We have such a huge mixed use in our neighborhood that I think is for someone to say that we don't have mixed use and we're only owner occupied or only single family is actually very misrepresentative of what our neighborhood is. So when it's implied that we are not a diverse neighborhood in terms of the type of use and the options, there actually is there are a lot more options than in other neighborhoods, say Myra Ridge neighborhood or others in our community. The price point goes up because of its location relative to the university. And that's unfortunately something that when it comes for renters, that's being affected with that. Also the quality of the properties are not being maintained. If you look, there are a lot of properties that are for rent in our neighborhood right now, and apartments as well as others, and they are not getting rented because people have not maintained their property. And that's really on a question of the city maintaining and following through with some of the ordinances that are there relative to use and properties, as well as owners not taking quality of their properties. That said, I am not in favor of having by right the ability to do businesses on the east side of Lincoln Avenue. I want to follow through, and I agree completely that I'm not against the idea of having one, but I really want to have neighborhood input, because there are houses with neighbors, not just rentals, like it's a mix of rentals and others that are right up against Lincoln Avenue. And so what goes in there, we do care because we will be affected. They will be our neighbors behind us, as well as, next door potentially. So I do think that matters, and it shouldn't be a free, open area for that. I think that is a very important thing, and that, special use permits seem just as reasonable on the east side of Lincoln, because it was intended. And if you look at the nature of those design, it's not just design standards, is my understanding, with the Lincoln DC corridor. There was an intent and a thought process behind it to have it as a space that allowed a transition from Lincoln on. But I do not support that, having Lincoln be by right any kind of business. That's just not something, even a limited number, I would want to have input as a neighborhood to that list, and not through the Planning Commission experience, because the planning, I still And I know, oh, it's going to be different this time, but I'm not buying that because they have been so disrespectful over and over again to neighborhood input at the Planning Commission. And I don't see that changing because you haven't had that much of a turnover. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak and share my thoughts.
Thanks, Leslie. Yeah, again, apologies for the format tonight. This is the first time we've had experience trying to do a sort of a neighborhood meeting via Zoom. It might be the last opportunity we have for a while since we're returning to in-person stuff, which I'm pretty excited about. I do. There was a lot in what you said there, Leslie. I kind of want to just sort of as an education piece for everybody here. Go back to your point of the diversity of the housing options and things in the neighborhood. I think that, well, first of all, from the planning side, I don't think we've ever tried characterizing the neighborhood as not being diverse with respect to housing types. One of the things that makes West Urbana great is that it does have a diversity of housing types. But when you look at our zoning ordinance and what it allows these days, you can essentially only build new neighborhoods that are like Myra Ridge. And that zoning ordinance also applies to West Urbana. So there are a great amount of properties and buildings in West Urbana that are legally non-conforming uses. So there's some great old buildings that have been turned into condos. So there might be like 6 or 8 units in there. Those are non-conforming. You couldn't build that today because zoning does not allow it. So a lot of the housing stock in the neighborhood that makes it great, that that increases the price point for people who want to live there, would not be allowed today via our zoning ordinance. It's not just an Urbana issue; it's kind of a nationwide issue. Most zoning ordinances were written to do subdivision, cul-de-sac type subdivision developments post World War II, and you can't build stuff like you used to, and that's unfortunate. But that's kind of what we're stuck with now. Sorry for the planning lecture in the middle of this, but I feel like that's something that we don't discuss enough, and we don't have the forum to discuss that publicly. But let's move on. I'm done with my professor pulpit here. Bill Erickson.
Yeah, hello.
Hi, Bill.
Yeah, thank you. My interest would be in using this area for potential religious purposes, not in the way of a church that would have a huge parking lot or anything like that, but in office space, perhaps areas to assist people in the neighborhood, students, maybe a help center for international students, a fairly low impact type of use for the building. There are other religious organizations along the corridor pre-existing, and I was wondering if there are limitations within the present ordinances that would prevent that. I know one church along Lincoln tried to purchase a sorority here a few years ago and they were denied. And I was just needing more information, explanation of the potential for that type of use. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Erickson. I'm going to look some things up in the zoning ordinance so that I can respond to that question. But let's, while we're doing that, let's move along to Danny Otto and Barbara Schenk.
It's just me, Danny Otto. My wife's not responsible for my comments. Thank you again for this meeting. And, you've heard what I have to say before, but I just want to underline it. I don't think that anything in terms of non-residential should be allowed along Lincoln by right. You said there's only 12 properties, but some of those are clustered together, and it's a high percentage of the frontage in those blocks. And the community might say that, one property in there, they've got a plan that they could do something that would really be an addition and people support. But to do 2 or 3 properties in a row alters things. I think we're just going to be strongly opposed to signing off and saying that things can go by right. And since you say that the transformation would be gradual at any rate, I don't think we would be creating a bottleneck where the planning staff couldn't handle 12 projects in the next 6 months. So I don't think that requiring a hearing process would be too onerous. Then I also am curious about when will the proposed language be posted for us to review? Will we only get to see it when it's presented to the Plan Commission? And are you asking the Plan Commission to act on it at that meeting where it's presented to them? Or is there going to be a follow-up meeting so people have time to study the language and think about it and digest it?
Yeah, that's a great question, Danny. So I think we'll probably have the language posted by maybe the end of this week.
Friday, Kevin, ahead of that Plan Commission meeting.
Yeah, so I mean that's a standard turnaround for Plan Commission, but since this is our project that we're bringing to the Plan Commission, and we're already anticipating that it's probably going to be more than a 1 meeting thing, we can recommend to Plan Commission that that we discuss it at the April 7th meeting, but continue it to the following meeting just to give people more time, as you said, to digest it. Because I mean, it's our thing. We're in not a huge rush. I mean, we do have other work that we that we need to get to in the planning world. But 2 weeks, to have another meeting is not gonna break anything. So I appreciate the question. Okay. Gabe Nardi.
Hi. Thanks for taking my comments. I'm also a resident of West Urbana, and I'm a teacher at Leal School in West Urbana. I just wanted to echo something that you said, Kevin, about sort of the history of zoning locally, but in our nation. And I just kind of wanted to speak out in favor of these small incremental changes that you all are proposing. Almost all of these ideas sound exciting to me as a parent, also of kids in the elementary school and in the middle school. Having moved here about 10 years ago from a city, looking for vibrancy in a neighborhood, these things that you're talking about, these very small changes, would make the neighborhood much more welcoming to people like that. But also to people in general, knowing that zoning laws have a long history of maintaining power for those people who are already in power, and for excluding people who haven't had a voice and continue to not have a voice in our city, but also in our country. Thanks.
Thank you. Lois Steinberg.
Hi, can you hear me? I agree with Leslie Sherman, Danny Otto, Eric Sachs. Kevin, I'm confused. You were referencing the whole country is basically trying to unzone. I think that's a wrong direction because it's not a one size fits all. And especially when you have a university town where the university is the main business here.
Lois, can I jump in? Sorry, if that's
no, I just a question.
That's not what I was saying.
Okay, but you were saying, okay, never mind what I said then. Cancel that.
I just wanted to be clear on it.
Question for you: is Stone Creek within Urbana city limits?
Yes.
Okay. So is there zoning out there? Because they're having these large lot sizes for really cheap, and it's like another suburbia they're building. Why?
Yeah, there is zoning. Yes.
Yeah, but they get away with it. It's probably going to be lily white. Why do they get away with that? And also, you know, for the large lots and, you know, at a cheap price, and the city is giving some kind of tax break for all the construction materials they got. I don't know if that, you know, all that's correct, but it kind of pisses me off because then we're here in Woona and we get accused of a lot of things because we're so beholden to trying to keep our neighborhood. And I don't know, I'm just making a comparison between these two things. It's kind of cryptic, but I really do not want to see any development of businesses on Lincoln Avenue itself. And it would be really great. Maybe the city could provide some incentives to a developer who is willing to convert some of those frat houses into older adult living situations, which is really what's the trend these days. Is there's a lot of older people, and a lot of people in this neighborhood want to bring their older parents to this neighborhood to keep an eye on them without having to move them in their house. And I know developers look at the Woona neighborhood as a cash cow because they can charge students exorbitant rents, making it impossible for regular people to rent. But perhaps there's some developer out there who doesn't have that kind of you know, dollar signs in their eyes so much. And maybe the city can provide some incentive to build, to reconstruct these buildings that are already conducive to communal living, you know, a center space for older adults to live in. And it's also a great street to be on, to be near, you know, Cranert Center. These older adults can, you know, not have cars and walk to places. And it's also convenient. You'll think I'm crazy already. You probably already do. But it's convenient for ambulances to come. It's on a main thoroughfare where they could come and pick them up when they have heart attacks quick. So anyway, maybe the city can provide incentives for that. I really hate to see any commercial use, not even a coffee shop. It's just a slippery slope where every 20 years, another block completely falls to predatory developers and even the university. That's all. Thanks.
So Lois, no, we don't think you're crazy. And I feel like you just made some really great points that I have to respond to. So I think the idea of senior housing is fantastic. I can talk to Sheila Dodd. She heads up our grants management division to see if she has some ideas for it. Well, actually, our newest planner here, Nick Olson, might have some ideas for it because he has a background in housing policy. But Lois, you want senior housing and you want seniors to be able to walk to stuff. So what we're trying to propose here is to allow small scale stuff that people in the neighborhood can walk to. That's what we're trying to get at. So, and that's why we're just saying for it to be smaller scale along Lincoln Avenue. Like we're only talking 2,000-3,000 square feet. So like not huge, not taking these old buildings and turning them into like a giant banquet center unless they get a special use permit. So I feel like we have some of the same, like there's some common ground here that I just wanted to point out. Yeah, to your point about Stone Creek, yes, they have zoning. And as I said, and I'm not going to pick on Stone Creek for anything, but it's they have zoning. Our zoning ordinance does not set a maximum size for a lot. So you can, as long as you meet the minimum size, which by the way is larger than many of the lots in West Urbana. If you meet the minimum lot size, you could have as big of a lot size essentially as as you want. And that's one of the frustrating things about our zoning ordinance as it stands. Because when you allow really, really large lots, you're serving them with the same amount of streets and sewers, but you're only serving, say, one house instead of like 2 or 3 or 4 houses. So it's kind of frustrating in that aspect. And that's not just, that's not a Stone Creek thing. That's just what you're allowed to do based on our zoning rules right now.
Thank you for clarifying.
You're welcome. Ian Hammond.
Hi, all. Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you to everyone for putting time into putting this together and everyone talking for sure. So a couple quick thoughts and then a question. Kind of some semantic kind of stuff. Mixed use neighborhood usually refers to more than just mixed residential use. It's usually referencing commercial and office and other stuff. Which we definitely don't have in WUNA for all that much. Then on the Zoom side of things, it's only because you guys are set up as a webinar, not as a regular call. I think that's a quick fix for you guys. Easy peasy. As a family with a couple young kids, when we were looking at houses in the neighborhood in the last 2 years, I will say that we almost always, if it was a house that was behind or next to a frat, we almost always said, we're good. We'll pass on that. So, and this is just going back to what someone said earlier. So, so if that was like a retail operation or something else, I think we would have been more inclined, but just the thought of living next to or behind a frat seemed less appealing than other items, to be honest. And, if we're talking about how busy Lakin Avenue is, I think that's actually a better argument to have some walkable, services on our side of Lincoln per se. I don't live within that kind of couple blocks zone, so I don't want to necessarily speak for other people that live there. I totally understand their concerns 100%. So, in my mind, it sounds like a great idea to have commercial along there, but I don't live right there, so I do want to defer to those folks. So my question stemming from that is, what's the downside of leaving it as a special use permit? Isn't there, it's a minimum lot size? Is that kind of the biggest issue there?
Well, I mean, there are a couple issues with requiring a special use permit. One is, yes, we have planning staff that one of our main jobs is to process cases. But during the pandemic, the number of cases didn't go down, it actually went up. So, processing cases takes a lot of time, and not that that's bad. There's a reason to be processing cases. But if there are certain things that are going to be relatively innocuous that we can allow by right, we much prefer that from a staff side, because then we can focus on bigger projects and better things. We haven't done a proper neighborhood plan in Urbana since probably 2007. I would love it if we had staff time to do that. Our caseload is kind of a lot, and it makes that really hard to do some of those, I'd say better, more community-oriented projects. On the other side of things is, and I know people like to, think that developers are evil and things, but, if somebody wanted to reuse one of these buildings, so if they're a developer and they want to reuse something, asking them to jump through hoops to do like a small, I'll throw it out there again because I love it, small coffee shop in one of these old buildings as part of like an apartment conversion that's going to take a vacant building and put it to good use. I don't think we should be asking them to jump through hoops for that. That's something that I think people, like, I haven't heard anybody say really like, oh, little coffee shop, that's horrible. So it's just, it's just, it adds uncertainty. So when you require zoning approvals, it adds uncertainty, which means there's a greater chance that good projects don't happen. So it's kind of, you got to strike a balance between like, okay, well, what do we want? What's good? And then what do we want to make people jump through hoops for? So we're trying to come up with ways to do that. So that's why we're suggesting like limiting hours and limiting size. And okay, if you want to do more than that, you're going to need to get a special use permit. So sorry, that was probably a pretty long response, but hopefully it gave you some insight into what we're thinking on our side.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. Kara.
Hello. I'm talking to you from my dining room where it's about 45 feet from a fraternity house. Some of you might have seen my message on the window listserv about our current joy of their dumpster. And I use that as just as an example of realities of like, living next to kids who are in and out all the time in a quasi high traffic situation. And we've lived here for over 20 years and it's been fine. We've raised kids here. Unlike the person's like, oh, we'd think twice. I have to say it's been fine. It's never been a big deal, but it's the opposite end of this process that I grow concerned with. Like, it sounds great. We're saying a small coffee shop, this, or even a residence. That all sounds great. And you guys are all front loading that, working with developers, and you have all these rules guiding things. But it's the problem when the things are in place and no one's following up on the trash or the noise or, hey, we had to take up the cops' time 5 times for this loud party. Or, hey, a bunch of us have written letters about this trash situation and nothing's happened. So here, perhaps I'm speaking to the wrong audience of the speakers on the call, but for some of the listeners, it's all part of the process. If you want these cool things, then you have to do right by everyone involved, and that's enforce the rules and really do what you're going to say. Because for the large majority of the time I've lived in this neighborhood, whether it's dealing with TCBC or the fraternities or, somebody's cutting down trees, we are begging people just to enforce the rules. I mean, God bless Leslie Sherman, Lisa Trull, Sarah McAvoy, these folks on the front lines, just begging people to enforce the laws and rules we already have. And so now what I hear is you want to change rules and things are close, there's a lot of mixing of retail business. This cannot happen unless you're going to ensure the quality of life on that back end for those people who have invested in here, in this neighborhood, and in these businesses as well. It's not fair. So I appreciate your time and consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Tacey?
There we go. I'm unmuted. Yeah, I'm going to sort of support a lot of what the locals have said. Yay for keeping old buildings, sororities and fraternities, having getting studios, condos, apartments in there. And I understand having 10 rental houses on my single block where there's only, 2 owner occupied on my block. And it is the same issue that I've seen everybody talking about of trash, noise. And we add to that domestic violence issues by having all these people here. But separately, I think, the residential use is great. And again, as long as the rules are enforced, and again, we don't want to be wasting people's time like the cops or Jason, who takes care of garbage issues. I mean, I don't know how many people are contacting him. That's why he can't solve the problems on our street because everybody else is having the same issues. But the retail use, and, I get how a little coffee shop and old house sounds great. But again, as Eric said, it's all in the details. And that's why just issuing this by right. And I respect you guys' time. You guys put so much time in this, and there are other things you can't do. Maybe that gets solved by hiring more staff, right? Both of these are equally important, and just giving it a by right, we are going to end up in a mess. And quite honestly, I'm a newcomer to Urbana. I moved here from a relatively large city. And if I was looking for mixed use housing when I moved here, to have the coffee shop down below me or right around the corner, I would have chosen to live in a place like that. And I look at downtown Urbana, and I had friends come stay with me, and they kept on saying, where are all the people? There's a part of downtown Urbana where this is where that kind of stuff is supposed to go, and it's abandoned half the time. And there's so many other buildings down there, or the empty parking lots down in the city, that's a great place to develop some of those things and keep this area residential, whether it's, senior housing, studios, condos, apartments. So that's my 2 cents. I mean, there's the Moore District on Green Street, campus towns all developed, but sort of encroaching that into this neighborhood just seems, it seems unfair. And, when I look at South Urbana, nobody's saying that for South Urbana, nobody's saying that for East Urbana, right? As far as I know, don't get me started with Stony Creek. So there's all these other areas that are staying residential, but Wuna seems to be the target, again, because of the university, right? And the city where I came from, there was definitely a housing shortage. I mean, deep housing shortage where people had to travel 2 hours because they just couldn't find an apartment. My sense is, and I could have this wrong, we don't have a housing shortage here. We have apartments that have recently been built, and they're very, very expensive, right? So it's not that just because we're going to get more housing that's going to suddenly become affordable housing for people. I don't think that is a given. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Right, I don't see anybody who hasn't spoken yet, so let's go back to Sarah McAvoy.
Hi, thanks for round 2 for me. Because we're in the webinar format, I don't know if our family friends, Chris and Gazette Hartman, are on the call. But after their proposal was voted down, they wrote a very, very long letter and wanted to have a very long conversation with me. What went wrong? What could we have done? And I said, well, usually the city brokers a meeting at the Urbana Free Library, and we come together as a neighborhood, and huge amounts of people show up, and you could have showed your early design, and we would have given you feedback. Make this darker, don't do this, have it, and we would have had the conversation. So, Kevin, I'm going to push back on, retail uses being called innocuous. I don't see it that way. And I think the conversation that will happen with the special use permit and the conversation that has to happen around that will then engender the kind of changes and compromise by listening to the neighborhood. And then those developers can work with us and achieve their goals. And I think we could have success, but, because we had every